You're about to listen to an episode of the PrimateCast Origins. This time, a half-century journey into becoming a primatologist and wildlife biologist, shared by distinguished professor Dr. Mewa Singh of the University of Mysore.
Evolution,
communication,
cognition,
conservation,
behavior.
Primatology.
Typically primates.
Become the monkey.
Well, hello everyone, and once again, glad to have you back in the audience for this episode of the PrimateCast Origins, where we hear from experts in the field of primatology and beyond about how they got started and became some of the most influential folks around. I'm your host, Andrew McIntosh from Kyoto University's Wildlife Research Center, and this episode is taken from our International Primatology Lecture Series, Past, Present, and Future Perspectives of the Field. This is the brainchild of Dr. Michael Huffman, and like our normal programming, is brought to you by CICASP. The main goal of this lecture series is to share the origin stories of experienced practitioners of primatology and related fields. To do that, Mike Huffman has invited a revolving door of renowned scientists to join us on the program and share their own stories with us. The PrimateCast Origins is our way of sharing those stories right here on the podcast. Unlike our normal interview format, these lectures are being done as part of our CICASP Seminar in Science Communication, which is aimed at graduate students here in the Primatology and Wildlife Science program at Kyoto University. So what you'll hear is a lecture that was recorded in Zoom and generally includes slides, so there may be references to visual aids that are obviously not available in audio format. But for anyone wishing to see the speakers presenting their talks with video, we invite you to check those out on the CICASP TV YouTube channel. Okay, so in this installment of the PrimateCast Origins, you'll be hearing a lecture given by distinguished primatologist and wildlife biologist Dr. Mewa Singh from the University of Mysore in India. Mewa has a diverse background and, as he describes in his lecture, took a roundabout path to primatology. I think that's one of the main takeaways of this lecture is that there's really no single path and that people can grow into their careers and make a difference nonetheless. In the lecture, Mewa basically lays out two general storylines. In the first storyline, he looks at primate models for conservation. He draws a fascinating comparison between two related but behaviorally and ecologically distinct species of macaques living in India, the lion-tailed macaque and the bonnet macaque. Mewa describes how the lion-tailed macaque is a forest-dwelling primate that fares poorly in the face of habitat destruction and human expansion. He's been involved in a lot of research into the habitat requirements of these forest dwellers, really getting to understand what it is they need to survive and thrive, and pushing local governments and other institutions to create the means to protect and reconnect essential habitat for them. He contrasts the lion-tailed macaques with bonnet macaques, a species of macaque that is seemingly adapted, if not perfectly, to life among the people, living along gradients from forests to agricultural lands to temples and fully urban settings. He also talks about other commensal species like rhesus macaques and long-tailed macaques, which are often found around humans and display various behaviors that allow them to be successful there, including their ability to exploit human food sources and extract them using different tricks and tools. This brings us to his second storyline, which is all about the acquisition of those new foraging techniques and skills that allow commensal macaques to really take advantage of human-dominated spaces. What's especially interesting here is that his group has conducted various experiments with urban macaques and describes just how different their behavior can be from their wilder counterparts living in less human-influenced environments. He reminds us that such behavioral flexibility is really a key to understanding how animals may or may not be able to cope with changing landscapes. I think you're really going to enjoy this lecture by iconic Indian primatologist Dr. Mewa Singh. He's a storyteller and really seems invested in helping out the younger generations in their own journeys into studying and protecting wildlife. And he leaves loads of nuggets of advice along the way. So, as always, here is Dr. Michael Huffman introducing Dr. Mewa Singh to get us started.
Mewa, it's a great pleasure to have you join us today. I've been looking forward for many months to your giving this talk. I've known Mewa for a number of years now. I've met him in India and I've met him in different places around the world for conferences and things, but he's a very, very highly respected primatologist in India and well-liked and respected by his colleagues around the world. He's had a very productive career over the years, working on many different species, as we'll hear about today. But he's a very generous man, and we're very happy that he's able to spend some time with us today and teach us about his fascinating work over the years. Mewa, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Mike, and your team for inviting me. Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. Most of the times, we always give a take-home message after you deliver a talk, but I deviate a little bit, and I start with my take-home messages. I have two take-home messages in this talk. The first one is that I am not a biologist, by the way. I do not have any background in biology. I do not have any formal training in biology, but I have been doing biology my whole lifetime. So the first message is that one need not have a formal degree in a discipline to become a specialist in that discipline. And the second and the most important message is that a high standard research, even if it is experimental research, which we usually think that will be very costly, will be very expensive, but that research also can be used using some local resources at a very low cost. And this is a strong message for students from habitat countries where they have very limited access to resources, they have very limited funds. And I want to convey this message to them that you would see that the research, which is of a very high standard, you can use it, very kind of local resources. You would see the way my students have been using very simple kind of locally available resources. So these are the two messages to begin with. And, I have been giving talks as Mike and so many other people. When you give a talk somewhere as a wildlife biologist, often people ask you a question, how did you become a wildlife biologist? Okay, like this talk is, how did you become a primatologist? So there are stock answers people give. Some people would say, oh, I have been passionate about animals since my childhood. Or, oh, we live close to a forest and I often see wild animals. Or sometimes somebody would say, oh, when I was young, my parents used to take me to a wildlife park very frequently. Or for academicians, somebody would say, I studied wildlife biology for my degree. However, I did none of these. Okay. And let me tell you my background. I come from a state in India, which is Punjab, which is a flat agricultural landscape. And I belong to a family of farmers. After my school or college, I used to go and do some farming, tend to cattle in the farm, drive tractor and so on. And we had a 25 hectares farm. And I still remember, we had 7 trees, which was mango and neem and etc. Total 7 trees. And I never saw a forest or a so-called wild animals till I was 22 years old when I started doing primatology research. And as far as my background in science or humanities is concerned, I was never a biology student. I did my bachelor's degree in English literature, economics, and psychology. And then I got admission to do my master's degree in English at a place called Patiala and to do master's degree in psychology at a place called Chandigarh. Chandigarh, if some people know, is the most beautiful city in India. It is a very well-planned city. So it was the city that attracted me. So rather than Patiala, I thought I would try to live in a beautiful city. So I went to Chandigarh and ended up doing my master's degree in psychology, for which actually I had no plan. I thought I would do my master's degree in English literature. When I was doing my master's degree in psychology, there used to be one course in psychology which was called physiological and comparative psychology. We don't use the word comparative psychology anymore. It's called animal behavior. So I thought I would study that course, but then somebody told me that, look, you are not that intelligent. So I did not opt for that course. However, later on, people kept talking that comparative psychology or animal behavior is a very prestigious subject in the Western world. As usual in developing countries, when I was a graduate student, everybody always thought I would end up in America or in Europe somewhere, as a doctoral student or as a postdoc or something. And I was told that comparative psychology has a lot of scope in those countries. And there was one very eminent professor at a university called Meerut in India, very well known. Mike would know, Professor S.D. Singh, who did some classic work on primates in 1960s, and he published in Scientific American. He was the first person from India to publish on primates in Scientific American on urban monkeys. This was in 1969. So I visited his lab in 1973. I started talking to him and I got fascinated about what the work he was doing on monkeys. And he also offered me a fellowship So I started working with him on primates in 1973. Now, this was a very interesting work which Professor S.D. Singh was doing. Professor S.D. Singh worked with Harlow at Wisconsin. And if you remember, you recall that Harlow's experiments were on social deprivation, where the rhesus monkeys were deprived of their mothers, of their peers, and so on, but in laboratory situations. And Professor S.D. Singh replicated all that if behavior is a product of natural selection, then it should be studied in the habitats where the behavior evolved. So he conducted all these experiments on isolation rearing, peer rearing, mother-infant rearing, natural groups in the forests of Himalayas. So these experimental studies were being done in the forests in the natural habitats of rhesus monkeys. And I joined Professor S.D. Singh, and I went to the forest first time to study monkeys with Professor S.D. Singh. So I worked in 1973, 1974 with Professor Singh, and then I moved about 2,500 kilometers away south because I was more interested than in the Western Ghats. So I came to University of Mysore, where I have been since 1974. But just before I go to my talk, I just want to talk about a few people who have played a very important role in my life. The first one is Professor S.D. Singh. As I talked about, I joined his research. He introduced me to primatology. And another is Dr. R.S. Pirta. He was my one-year student, a senior, working with Professor S.D. Singh, a person who had learned already a lot about primatology. So my initial learning was because Professor Singh was in the university and we were working in the forest. So my initial learning about primatology came from Raghubir Singh Pirta. When I was in Mysore, there is one, Dr. Ullas Karan. He's a very well-known carnivore biologist. He works on tigers. And both of us, when we were young, both of us used to go on my motorbike, go to the forest and make some watchtower in a tree and sit there the whole day. And he was interested all the time looking at insects. Birds would come. He would make a list of birds. And I was looking for monkeys all the time. And the monkeys are not there all the time. I would get bored. So over days, spending time with Ullas, I started, developing interest in forestry, especially in bird watching. And within a couple of months, my interest got diversified that I started looking at wildlife biology as such. So it was Ullas who basically introduced me to wildlife biology. And then I went to Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., one of those famous courses conducted by this great man, Dr. Rudy Rudran. And I attended these courses with Dr. Rudran. And that's where I got introduced to wildlife conservation and management, because the courses were basically on wildlife management. Then a couple of years later, at Bucknell University, Pennsylvania, was Professor Douglas Candland, who came to Mysore as a Fulbright scholar. Then he was instrumental in getting me as a Fulbright scholar to US, where I taught in 1986 and 87. And that opened a different horizon when I taught American university students. So that was another milestone. And for the past about 2 decades, I have been interacting with Dr. Werner Kommens from Germany. And I have spent a lot of time in Germany with him. He was at German Primate Center and then at Cologne Zoo, where I have learned a lot about primates in captivity, conservation breeding, and captive management. Now, my group here at Mysore has worked on a large variety of animals. Now, this includes macaques, which is rhesus macaques, bonnet macaques, line-tailed macaques, long-tailed macaques. As a matter of fact, I also have one paper on Japanese macaques, which I studied in a laboratory at Bucknell University. Then we have studied Nilgiri langurs and Hanuman langurs, slender lorises, elephants, and rodents include squirrels, mice, rats, bats. Carnivores are dogs, bears, wolves, and lizards. So these are the whole variety of species which my students study. But today's talk, I would talk only about the bonnet macaques, the line-tailed macaques, and the long-tailed macaques. And my talk has two parts. The first part, I would be talking about approaches to wildlife conservation with primates as models. Okay, the second talk is a bit of an experimental kind of a work and observational work also, where I would be talking about the emergence of new skills in monkeys, the monkeys which are living in human-dominated landscapes. So these are two slightly different kinds of topics. Let me start with the first one, approaches to wildlife conservation with primates as models. By and large, not necessarily true for every species, but by and large, we see two kinds of species, not only primates, but a lot of other wild animals. some are obligatory forest dwellers, and some are largely commensal. By commensal, I mean here that they share resources and the habitat with people. Commensalism is used, with so many meanings. But in my talk today, I mean commensal means they're living with people. They share resources and also they share habitats. And for this, I select two species which we have been working on. This one on the left is the lion-tailed macaque, Macaca silanus. This is a typically forest-dwelling species. And this is also an endangered species. And the other one is the bonnet macaque, Macaca radiata, which is largely commensal, which is found in southern India. So let me start with first the lion-tailed macaque. Lion-tailed macaque is endemic to the Western Ghats. It has a very limited range of distribution in southern India. As you can see, these green patches here, these are the Western Ghats and the rainforests. And it occurs only in about 34,000 square kilometers, but actual occupancy is only about 2,500 square kilometers. It has been considered as a highly endangered species. I remember when International Primatological Society Congress was at Kyoto, I was there, and this monkey was listed as one of the 25 most endangered primates in the meeting in Kyoto. And the numbers we have estimated are to be less than 3,500. But the bigger problem is that even these 3,500 individuals are now distributed in 49 subpopulations, which are largely isolated. So that is the status of this monkey. And I would talk only about one particular region called the Anamalai Tiger Reserve, which Mike is smiling now because he has seen this place. This is a very beautiful place. It is about 1,000 square kilometers. It is a typical representative of the Western Ghats. There are so many kinds of habitat types, and the rainforest, I would show that the rainforest is fragmented. Once you start climbing these hills, we have these low elevation scrub forests. You go slightly up about 900 meters or so, you get these large stretches of deciduous forests. And you go still up, you have evergreen forests, which are typical, tropical rainforests. And you go to the tops, you have these sholas and grass hills, extensive grass hills. So as the crow flies in about 30 kilometers, you have so many different kinds of habitat types and so many different kinds of animals. I talk only about primates. We find 5 primate species here. One is nocturnal, the slender loris, and there are 2 macaques and 2 langurs. But in the dry forests, in the eastern part, we have the bonnet macaques and the Hanuman langurs. And the western part, which is wet, we have the lion-tailed macaques and the Nilgiri langurs. But what you see green patches here is once upon a time, these were contiguous patches of rainforests. Somewhere about 150, 200 years ago, the British people started opening up some places here for tea plantations. And then most of the rainforest became fragmented. Now, most of these fragments actually have groups of lion-tailed macaques. So you can see, and lion-tailed macaque is an obligatory rainforest dweller. Lion-tailed macaques won't even pass through deciduous forests. If between the patches you have a deciduous forest, the lion-tailed macaques won't use it. They won't use tea plantations at all. So they have become restricted now to these fragments. Now you can see here, for example, there is one fragment. Here, this is one fragment which has 5 groups of lion-tailed monkeys. This is another fragment which has 4 groups of lion-tailed monkeys. There are 7 fragments which each has 2 groups of lion-tailed monkeys. And there are 8 fragments where there is only one group, probably isolated for at least 80 to 90 years. So you can imagine what kind of stochastic effects can occur in such isolated groups. So a lot of studies have been done on these now by my research group and also Ajit Kumar and Umapati and several other people, in this region. So everything has been studied in these monkeys now, the distribution patterns, demography, ecology, behavior, genetic status, parasite status, and management. So we have perfect data now to understand conservation and management of this species. Now let me quickly go through these. Now if you look at the demography, for example, in small fragments here, you can see that the adult sex ratio is highly variable. But if you see the large fragment, it gets sort of stabilized. The same thing is group size. Now, in small fragments here, you see the groups can be very small, like 7 or 8 animals, or groups can be as large as now. There are something like 90 monkeys. But once the fragment size becomes large, the group size becomes sort of modal. So the group size and both sex ratios are highly affected by fragmentation, and so is the density. The lion-tailed macaque cannot exist because of its requirements, its biology. lion-tailed macaque cannot be found in very high densities. So the natural distribution of lion-tailed macaques is about 2, 3, or 3 animals per square kilometer in areas which are relatively large or contiguous forests. But in the fragments in the Anamali Tiger Reserve where we work, in large fragments, you have about 5 animals per square kilometer. But in small fragments, you can have 2 to 95 animals per square kilometer. So you can see the effect can be there on their reproductive biology, on their social interactions, and so on. Once you have that kind of disturbed density and the genetic status, one of our students, Ram, he's from Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology. He did his PhD work. He collected fecal samples from the complete distributional range of the lion-tailed macaques and also from captivity. And in nutshell, what he has found is that in the forest fragments, there is a significantly depleted mitochondrial diversity as compared to the lion-tailed monkeys, which are found still in relatively large fragments or contiguous forests. And he also found that there are 2 populations. We have a gap in the Western Ghats called the Palghat Gap. So there is a population in the north and the south. We still haven't called them as subspecies or anything. But what he has reported is that there has been about 2.11 million years of separation between the 2 populations. And then the parasites also, the groups which are very close to people, they have more species of parasites and they also have higher prevalence of parasites. So this has been the effect of closeness to humans. So what should be done? Now we have all kinds of data on the monkeys, on the lion-tailed macaques. What should be done for their conservation? Because this is a concern for all the 3 state governments. And we are frequently approached by the state governments what to do for, because this is a highly endangered species. So these are different steps which we have been suggesting. First is identification of viable habitats. Then there are highways which have been constructed through the rainforests. And these highways have opened up the canopies. This lion-tailed macaque is an arboreal animal. Very rarely, if you go for example in the contiguous forest, you rarely see them on ground. They are always in the canopy, and their water requirements are also met from the trees only, because it's a wet forest. But because of this construction of highways, the canopy has opened up in many places, and we have several cases of monkeys dying. And these animals have to run on the ground to cross the road. And these buses and trucks going on speed, they have killed several animals. And for us, even one animal dying is a very significant loss. And then, as I showed earlier, that these are all distributed in forest fragments. So we have to link forest fragments. And some of these fragments are also private. Actually, most of them are private and they are highly degraded. So we need to enrich the degraded habitat. So what are we going to do now at this? To begin with, identification of regions for conservation. I would give you just one example. My student Kumara, he was doing his PhD work then, and we were studying one area in the state of Karnataka, where we suddenly found one place where there were several groups of lion-tailed monkeys in one contiguous forest. These are 4 different forest ranges. We found some 30 groups of lion-tailed macaques and about 60 groups of Hanuman langurs and several groups of bonnet macaques, and found there throughout the year. So we thought that this is a real, forest which we should conserve for primates, especially the lion-tailed macaques. And we started advocating this to the state government. And the government machineries move very slow. And this we started in around 2002 with the concerned state government in the state of Karnataka. And Kumara did a lot of work going to the forest department and pursuing it again and again. And it was in 2019, the first example where the data came from the scientific community. And on the basis of that input, the state government has declared now 930 square kilometers as lion-tailed macaque reserve. And this is now officially it is called Sharavati Lion-tailed Macaque Sanctuary. So this is the first example where the scientific work actually, has culminated in the declaration of a wildlife sanctuary for the lion-tailed macaques. And the second thing is linking canopies and fragments. Now, as I told you that these are, the highways. There is one organization in Mysore called Nature Conservation Foundation. And, we work in close cooperation. And, we got the idea that suppose we link the canopy on the highway. Suppose we just link something with the local material. This is, the bamboo materials put there. we just started putting ladder along with the forest department. The monkeys were very shy in the beginning. They would touch it and go back, and then they'd come down the tree and they run on the road. But after some time, they started walking over this and started using it. And now you would see in this video, see, this is over the road. There is a bus going down, and these monkeys are happily making use of these canopy bridges. Now these monkeys now don't come down. So this we showed as an experiment, and we have now identified areas where the monkeys need to cross. So the information has been provided to the forest department that, look, our job is to do these experiments, demonstrate what can be done. But it is now for the state government, because we have no funds of resources of this type. So this information is now provided to the forest department where they should start these kinds of experiments. And then, as I showed, these are all forest fragments here, where there are lion-tailed monkeys. So this another student, Anita, she went around, she walked through the valleys and between the fragments and valleys and small streams, and she started chalking out the areas which could be used for linking these forest fragments physically with afforestation. So she chalked out about all these areas and found out that you require only about 200 hectares of land. And government can acquire 200, these are all private lands, and government can acquire this 200 hectares of land. And she has pointed out all these places which you see here in blue. And so plan has been given out to the department that you can link these forest fragments. It would not only allow lion-tailed macaques to move. There are elephants here, there are tigers here, there are leopards here, there are dholes, that is Asiatic wild dogs. There are gaurs, there are sambars, all kinds of wild animals. So this will provide the connections between the fragments for all kinds of animals, where the lion-tailed macaque we are using only as a sort of a flagship. So now the question came, okay, you need to link these fragments, but which trees should be grown? You need to grow trees here, but which trees should be grown? Now the trees should be native to the Western Ghats. They should have a fast growth. They should provide good shade for coffee plantations, because these are private lands. And these trees should be the ones which are used by primates, squirrels, birds, and so on. So which are those trees? Nature Conservation Foundation again has prepared a whole list of these trees. Okay, these are the trees which meet these criteria, and these are the trees which can be used for linking the forest fragments. But now again the question comes, can you really grow these trees? These are rainforest trees. And usually people say, oh, rainforest once gone is gone forever. You cannot regrow the rainforest. And these are all rainforest trees. Can you regrow these? Can you grow these forests? Can you grow the rainforest? Here is an excellent experiment, probably one of the best field experiments I have seen in the world. This is done by Nature Conservation Foundation in the city, Mysore city, where I am. Now, this organization was given a plot by a tea garden to start plantation, these native trees. This is how this plot was in 2002. So they started planting these rainforest trees. This is how it became in 2006. And by 2015, rainforest was completely regenerated. Okay, now you see the picture. On the right here, you see a benchmark, Annamalai Tiger Reserve Forest. And the left, you see the restoration site. I hardly see much difference. Give another few more years, probably you won't be able to tell the difference between the two. So experimentally now it has been shown. So what has been done now? The areas are shown where the forest fragment can be linked. These are the streams, these are the valleys where it should be linked. Which trees? The trees have been identified and mentioned. Can you grow these trees? Experimentally, it has been shown that these trees can be grown. So the entire master plan for this is now ready. Okay, the next is the commensal species, the bonnet macaque. Bonnet macaque also is endemic. It has two different subspecies, relatively widespread as compared to the lion-tailed macaques, but it is largely commensal. And I would quickly talk about 4 factors about the bonnet macaques to give you an example of what is happening. Now, I was talking about the species which are obligatory forest dwellers. Now I'm talking about the species which is largely commensal. So let me start first with the shrinking range. Somewhere around central India, we have some rivers which separate the southern part and the northern part of India in terms of vegetation as well as in terms of animal life. We have south of these rivers, we have the bonnet macaque, and north of these rivers, we have the rhesus macaque. And as you know, the rhesus macaque has a very wide distribution. It starts from Afghanistan, through Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, China, Thailand, up to Cambodia it goes, up to Laos probably it goes, and probably some groups even in Vietnam. So it has a very wide distribution, whereas bonnet macaques is only limited, distributed and in southern India. But what we have been seeing, we don't know still how, whether some rhesus macaque groups crossed over the rivers or whether they were trapped by somebody and left this side of the rivers. I can't say it. But we started seeing some of these rhesus macaques south of these rivers in the habitat of bonnet macaques. Bonnet macaque physically is much smaller than the rhesus macaques, and temperamentally, rhesus and Japanese macaque belong to the first very temperamental monkeys, and bonnet macaque comes in the third grade. So the bonnet macaque is a very humble species as compared to the rhesus macaque. So wherever the two are interacting, these rhesus macaques are pushing them down, and they're taking over areas of the bonnet macaque. Now, our last record show that about 28,000 square kilometers area where we had the bonnet macaques before has been taken over by the rhesus macaque. And then we also wanted to find out whether there are really viable forest populations of bonnet macaques. We did extensive surveys in both forest types, the dry forest as well as the wet forest as well as the dry forest, and covering 4,788 kilometers. And we found very, very low densities of bonnet macaques in forests. In some of the places, the density was so low that we could not apply the distance sampling methods to arrive at the density level. You require some level of density. So this is just to show that the bonnet macaque is not really a forest living species. And where they were generally found in temples and tourist places where people were feeding them. So we surveyed very large areas in the 3 states of South India, visited about 124 temples and tourist locations, talked to people, talked to the priests there. But in most of these places, people are not tolerating these monkeys anymore. The monkeys have been trapped. And blindly, the forest department people have trapped them, or the municipalities have trapped them, and they simply go and leave them somewhere outside, where either they die or they go back to some villages or some places. And, this is very unscientifically done. And in most of the places, these monkeys have disappeared, to show that these places, these tourist places, etc., are also no more places for the bonnet macaques. The largest number of bonnet macaques, which I have seen now for almost 50 years, the largest population of bonnet macaques was around highways. There are highways. We had a lot of banyan trees, Ficus bengalensis. And, Paul Simons, who did his PhD on bonnet macaques, first PhD in 1962 or 62 to 64, he made a very nice statement. He said, wherever there is a Ficus bengalensis, there will be a bonnet macaque. All these highways had fantastic, density of ficus trees. So I started, this is an example I want to show that, unless you monitor scientifically a population and really keep the records, you don't know whether the population is increasing or decreasing, unless the records are maintained and published repeatedly. So this is one of the best examples. I started surveying 1,052 kilometers from the city. In the middle here is the city of Mysore, where I live. My university is. All these roads radiating from this city. I started my surveys in 1989. I mapped all the groups which were there from the city on these highways. And then I have repeatedly conducted these surveys in 98, 2003, 2009, 15, 18 on the same populations again and again, just to show you this is how these roads were about 30 years ago. Look at the beautiful Ficus bengalensis trees. You can see there is a group of bonnet monkeys sitting here. There are monkeys and squirrels and birds, and this is not too long ago. This is about 3 decades ago. This is how many of these highways were. Then they started widening them, and this is how they became about 2 decades ago. And then this is how they became about a decade ago, and this is how they are today. All the habitats, 100% habitats are gone. And so have the monkeys disappeared. They went to the croplands, they went to the villages where they have been often killed by people. And there are people, I don't want to show you these gory pictures. There are several of them, but I have just put one. We have so many such cases where people have poisoned the monkeys, they beat them up and they kill them and they dump them on the highways. And I have records of several hundred monkeys, bonnet monkeys, killed by people because there is no habitat left and they're simply going to the villages or the croplands, and they get killed or they die of starvation. So these records, now look at this from 1989 to 2014. I divided this area into what I call intensive cultivation zone, which is, throughout the year you have the crops. Now, this is where people don't tolerate them anymore. So in 1989, where I had 8 groups of monkeys with 139 monkeys, by 2014, the entire population has disappeared. 100% population is gone. And then there are certain regions which is called dry cultivation, because we have monsoon, which is seasonal in India. So certain areas you get the crop, the farmers get only one crop in a year. The monsoon now, for example, it would start now in a couple of days. The monsoon would start. And then people get this crop. So 6 months, there is no crop. So the cultivation is done only for a couple of months. And this is where many groups were there in 1989. They had recorded 39 groups with 858 individuals. These are also by 2018. This is reduced only to 14 groups with 152 individuals, 82% decline. Now, this will not be shown by people, if it is casual observation. You still drive on those roads. You still see a monkey group here and there. People would still say that, oh, no, the monkeys are there everywhere. But now, because it's systematically recorded and shown over the years that on some areas, 100% population is gone. In these areas, 82% population is gone. However, I have been monitoring one scrub jungle very close to my city, where there is, a scrub forest, deciduous forest also part of it. And there is one temple where monkeys get some little bit of food, but one group especially, but other groups are also foraging there in the areas around. And fantastic population stability. Look, over 30 years, look at the stability of the population, 7, 7, 7, 8, 7, 8 groups in that region. Animals 210, 206, 266, 246, 209, 251. So this gave me a clue that only such areas are now viable areas for the conservation of bonnet macaques. All other areas, it is useless to put in the money. It is useless to put in the effort. So we have started now propagating to the forest department. It is this kind of area that let us start looking for these kinds of areas. Let us start, declaring them as monkey reserves, bonnet macaque reserves. And there are many such areas in India where you have, small hillocks with lot of scrub and deciduous forests around, and maybe sometimes on the hilltop there is a temple. And we are identifying such places, which we would now suggest to the forest department. We have given a plan already that these are the areas you should declare as bonnet macaque reserves. So getting back to now, typically forest dwelling species, they are adapted to very limited habitat types, like the lion-tailed macaque are only in the rainforest, but these habitats are relatively stable. A rainforest can remain stable for 10,000 years. Nothing would happen if we don't interfere with it. And many of these animals are occurring in protected areas like wildlife sanctuaries and national parks. So the management only requires enhancing habitat quality and linking forest fragments. Okay, but typically commensal species, they live in a wide variety of habitats, but most of these habitats are unstable. You don't know what will happen tomorrow. Urban monkeys, they can be trapped in a temple or tourist places. They can be trapped anytime. Highways, I have seen all the trees have disappeared. So although they are adapted to wide variety of habitats, but most of these habitats are unstable. So these population crashes can occur and local extinctions are happening, already recorded. So management requires now identify few viable habitats, which are partially forest, partially commensal, provide a legal status to these habitats, and do not call these animals least concern anymore. So I have talked primates as models, but like this, there are so many other species. Now, for example, Nilgiri langur is largely forest dweller, but Hanuman langur is largely commensal. Tiger is largely forest dweller. Asiatic wild dog is largely forest dweller. But on the other hand, foxes, wolves, these are largely commensal. So these models, what we are talking about the primates now, with certain modifications, which are species-specific modifications, the same can be applied now for conservation and management of many other animal species. So first part of this lecture, what do we learn? What have we learned from this is that you need to get data on all these kinds of things: the habitat, diet, home range, activity budgets, social organization, health, epidemiology, inter and intraspecific interactions and their behavior, which is feeding, social reproductive behavior, distribution patterns, population density and population trends, dynamics, health and threat to survival, etc. And also some data from controlled studies. So all this is required for the management of these species. Now, quickly, the second part of this is a very interesting work which my students have done recently. We were not doing any kind of experiments till about 2010 or 2011-12. My work was mostly in the forest areas, although I started experimental work with Professor S.D. Singh, the semi-field experiments, where the monkeys were raised in different kind of conditions. But when I came to South, my work was mostly in ecology and in natural habitats. But still, this is in natural habitats. But some students got interested in something more, which could be seen either through observations or also through experimental studies. Now, this part deals with, we have been monitoring forest monkeys and urban monkeys for a long time for behavior. We saw so many interesting differences between their behavior. For example, you see simple thing. The forest monkey, the same bonnet monkeys, for example, the forest monkeys, even if it is a small group of 15 monkeys, in the night, they all sleep in different trees. They will go and occupy several trees. But in the morning, they would all get up and walk as a unit in the forest. Urban monkeys, even if there are more trees available, all the monkeys would come and sleep in one single tree. But in the morning, they all disperse. So you look at the fantastic adaptation that urban monkeys, because there is a lack of trees, so they have adapted to sleep close to each other in a single tree, but they have to forage in an urban environment. Everybody has to go on one's own. They are not even in visual or auditory contact with each other. They simply disperse. The forest monkeys, on the other hand, sleep in different trees, but move as a unit in the forest together. So they would look like as two different species if somebody simply looks at behavior. So we were looking at these behaviors in their ecology, but students got interested in some more interested things. And this is that the studies on food extraction. These monkeys in urban areas, they come across foods, which is often obviously the foods used by people. Now, which is packaged food. It is embedded, it is encased. There are certain fruits which are also embedded and encased in the forest, but most of the resources are openly available in the forest. But these foods are packaged foods. Now, these packaged foods require two things. One is extraction, that the animals have to extract food. They have to use certain skills to extract food. And some of the foods would also require processing. So the students started looking at these extraction and processing, in urban monkeys, and compared to the rural or the so-called, not the forest, but the rural monkeys, which are like the forest monkeys. So I would talk a series of these things now. This is about the Nicobar monkeys, the long-tailed macaques. This is a very interesting place because the long-tailed macaques are there. Most of them, the groups are in the forest. There's extensive rainforest there. But since long time, some of the tribes, they have been planting or they have been cultivating coconut in the coastal region. So some of the groups have started feeding on or have been feeding on coconuts. As you can imagine, coconut is very difficult to extract food out of. This coconut is so hard even for people. So you can see, the first phase, for example, it is green, it has to be broken, the outer shell, and then even the inner shell also, it is hard. Once it's ripe, it is very hard. So they have to break it open and extract the food. So it is not very simple. It's not very easy to, feed on coconuts. But some of these groups have been used to these coastal areas. But in 1960s, lots of people from the mainland India were also settled there in these islands. And they also started cultivation of coconuts. And there was a massive tsunami in 2004, which destroyed several coastal habitats. So some more groups of monkeys, and they have also started moving towards villages. So we have now a full gradient. So you have monkeys which are largely dependent on coconuts, some which are to some extent they visit coconut gardens, and some which are far away from coconut gardens in the forest. So this has provided an experimental setup by itself. So now these people, my students did this work. They started offering these food just to see the familiarity, for example, how familiar these monkeys are with the coconut and how likely they are to accept the coconut. Now here you see the first group here, the group one, which is living in a town. Okay, you can see on the right side that the coconut is given two phases. One is green and one is the ripe one. The first group, which is living in the town, now this food was kept. Now the monkeys in the evening, when they were going towards their sleeping trees, this food was given on the way. It was kept on the way. Now, these monkeys, the urban monkeys, they picked up both phenophases of the coconut, and one group which is slightly away from the town, but which also visits the town. This accepted not the green one, but only the ripe one. And the two forest groups, they were given other foods which are available in that forest. They picked up those foods, but they simply ignored the coconut. So these two forest living groups, you can see that there is the acceptability that the monkey groups which are living in the town accepted both phenophases. The one group which is little away accepted only the ripe ones, and the two forest groups did not, they simply ignored the coconuts given to them, although they accepted other food, they picked up other fruits. So now these studies, have been going on now for the past about nearly 10 years now, and about 8-9 years. Number of interesting behaviors have been seen in these monkeys. This coconut, as you can see now, it requires so much of cognitive skill because it's so hard. Now, monkeys first have to find out a hard surface. Then they have to pound it. And this is being done, by the way, on the monkeys which are in human-dominated landscapes. Now, they have to select a surface. Suppose the surface is sandy, or there are a lot of leaves. And if they pound, they won't be able to break it. So they select a particular kind of a surface and look at the way the monkeys break. And sometimes, these coconuts, they have mud or some kind of thorns over them. So what these monkeys do, they make use of tools in a way. So they pluck these leaves or twigs and they wrap around these coconuts before they start opening with the mouth. Now look at this. They just take these leaves or the branches, wrap it around, and then use them as tools. And not only this, they even make tools. You see here, these monkeys here in these photos, the monkeys are, detaching a twig using both teeth and mouth. They are even modifying these tools to these materials to use them as tools. And one of the very fascinating observation which has been there is teeth cleaning. Now, these monkeys do flossing, and they have been using different kinds of materials, bird feathers, thin wires, and sometimes a piece of cloth. And look at this monkey, this. So look at the tools which they are using from outside to clean the teeth. And this article actually we published in 2018 or 19 Primates in Japan. And this got so much of coverage. Actually, it was covered in Science. And Science covered it with a title, "Monkeys May Have a Better Dental Hygiene Than You." So this became a very, very popular article. And then we have done some studies on bonnet macaques in South India. Now, this was an interesting thing. We selected two groups of monkeys. One is the temple group, which is largely commensal, which is totally commensal. Most of their food is coming from people only. Okay. And another one, which is less exposed to people, which is about several kilometers away from the town where we live. What we did was we first gave an object to them, a concealed food, hidden food, in an object which is not familiar to them. This is a mouse trap. Now, this I want to tell the students now. See, these papers were published in quite high standard journals, and this costed us $50. Okay, we picked up this mouse trap, and this mouse trap has a spring over it. That's how we trap the mice. And if a monkey opens with one hand, it will snap back. So monkey has to open it, hold with one hand, and pick up the fruit with the other hand. But this is an object which monkeys have not seen, either the temple monkeys or the rural monkeys. So when we presented it to them, and this is how a series of experiments, but I show only one slide. Okay, the monkey lifts it holds it with one hand and takes the food out. And interesting thing, what happened now here? This rural monkeys, several of them simply ignored it, didn't even look at it. Some explored. Several of them attempted. Only about 30% were able to take the food out of this mouse trap. On the other hand, the urban monkeys, nobody ignored. Everybody started lifting it and exploring it. And then some left after, exploring. And then about 60% or more than 60% of them were able to take the food out of this. Okay. And then we thought of giving them object which is familiar to one group, okay, but not familiar to the other group. What else to give? A Coke bottle. Okay. Very nice. The student purchased the Coke, and drilled a hole, drank the coke, and put some little bit, this is the sweet buttermilk, which is put in this coke bottle. Okay, now coke bottle, the urban monkeys are very familiar with the coke bottles. They are seeing these coke bottles every day. But the forest monkeys haven't seen these coke bottles. But this coke bottle, the cap here is intact. The seal is not broken. Okay, the hole was drilled, the coke was drained, and it was filled inside, with the buttermilk, the sweet buttermilk. But the seal is kept intact. Now the monkeys tried several things. Some tried to bite it, some tried to bite it from the side. Okay, but some were so efficient. You look at this monkey with the canine first breaks the seal. Okay, he takes the seal off and then very neatly opens it and drinks it. Okay, and then look at this fantastic difference between the urban and the rural monkeys. This is our temple group, the urban monkeys, ignoring none, exploring everybody, attempted more than half. And again, about 60% of them were able to open this seal and drink this buttermilk. Okay, look at the agricultural land groups. Almost half of them simply ignored it. They didn't even look at the coke bottle. Okay, and then some of them explored it, lifted it here and there, and then some of them attempted it. Not even one was able to solve it. Whereas more than 60% of the urban monkeys opened, everybody was interested in it. They broke the seals, opened and drank the milk. And the agricultural land group, the rural group, not even one monkey was able to solve this problem and extract the food. Okay, now the recent experiments which the students have done is taking an urban-rural gradient in bonnet macaques and studying the food extraction and food processing. They selected 3 different groups. Now you can see down here, Mike. Mike has been collaborating with us, and this is the article which is published only 3 or 4 days ago in American Journal of Biological Anthropology, just last week or this week probably. Now this is in 3 different groups. One what is called high urban group, typically urban group, which is high exposure to encased foods, embedded foods. Simple. One we call medium, let us call it semi-urban, which has some exposure to anthropogenic food, but still they are largely dependent. But then the rural group, the third group, which has low exposure to these embedded or encased foods, which hardly has any kind of provisioning. So you have this gradient of, I would call now, only urban, semi-urban and rural groups, but which actually means is high exposure, medium exposure and low exposure to these encased and embedded foods. And what we used again, very expensive material, 1/4 of $1, peanuts. Okay, got these peanuts and used these peanuts in different form, 3 different forms and 3 different states. So you can see this as a 3x3 experimental design. Okay, this is taken as native, or the shell has been removed and the skin has been removed. Okay, or it is, you see the chemical state, for example, raw or boiled or roasted. Okay, so in each you have 3 states, 3 states. So you have 3x3 factorial experimental design, and these were offered to monkeys. Both these 3 places, the urban, the semi-urban, and the rural monkeys. First, acceptance. The urban monkey, the high exposure means urban monkey, they were very quick. Within 2 seconds, they accepted the peanuts. Just acceptance. The slide shows simply a time for acceptance. And the semi-urban, they took slightly longer. And the rural monkeys took longer to accept, first of all, to accept these peanuts as food at all. And then comes the processing methods. Okay. This is a very interesting observation. As far as the food acquisition was concerned, all groups primarily used hands. You break it open and etc. But the shelled peanut processing, they used, I would just show you the videos a little later. The one method which they used was only mouth. Okay. Then they used hand and mouth. And then they used hands. And very interesting thing is that only mouth was used mostly by the rural monkeys. Hand and mouth was used by all groups, and hands were used only by the urban monkeys. Now, this article is actually, again, very recently published. Okay, now we also analyzed videos available. This is where Mike did also a lot of work. These are the videos on Japanese monkeys and on vervet monkeys with different kind of exposure. It was very difficult to get these kinds of things from the internet, but with different degrees of exposure. So we were able to analyze bonnet monkeys, Japanese monkeys, and the vervet monkeys. So in simple, higher was the encounter with the packaged food, higher was the degree of urbanization, more was the hand used by the monkeys, shown in all three species of these primates. Now, we also observed some novel methods. This is the method which is only for one type of food. This is roasted peanut. Okay. Now, if you go, the shell has been removed. This is the seed, but the seed is with the skin and it is roasted. If you have seen, if you roast it, the skin will be little blackish. And if we try to eat it, for example, we would remove the skin because it will be little bitter. So you can eat with the skin, but you can remove the skin. And how do these monkeys remove the skin? Now they can remove the skin only with mouth. See, they put the seed in the mouth. They keep on chewing it. Okay. Spit the skin out and eat the seed. Okay. This is using only mouth. Or they can use both hand and mouth. Okay. Take it with the hand. Take it to the mouth. Or a smarter monkey, what it can do is that if this is a roasted seed, what you can do is put between the palms and do this. Very quick. Okay. And it's done. The skin is removed. But you use two hands. There is still another smarter monkey. Why you use two hands? Just put it on the ground and just rub it there. It's done. Cleaned. So you pick it up and eat it. So these last two methods now, what we call the palm rub and the rub ground, are what we have designated as novel skills. These are novel, foraging techniques. And look at this now, the time taken. The last one here, palm rub and rub ground, the time taken is significantly lesser as compared to if they use only mouth or they use hand and mouth. And if they do rubbing between palms and rubbing on ground, the time taken is significantly lesser. In other words, this is simply a more efficient method of food processing as compared to the other methods. And who used it? Only the urban monkeys. The palm rub behavior and the ground rub behavior is used not by, there was one attempt by a the semi-urban group, one monkey tried once. Okay, but these are behaviors used only by the urban monkeys, not by the rural monkeys, not by the semi-urban monkeys. And then these are individuals analyzed, not only as a group. So this is now, the down here is no processing. This is processing with mouth. This is processing with hand and mouth. And here it is using novel behavior methods. That is palm rub and rub on ground. And these are all urban monkeys. And two of the monkeys they are clustered here, hand and mouth. But no processing, eat it as it is. Okay. Or open it with mouth and hand and mouth. These are all the semi-urban and the rural monkeys. And the urban monkeys are sitting here alone, separate from all of them, using these novel foraging skills. So in many primate species, there are intergroup or interhabitat differences, like our urban monkeys and forest monkeys. Now, high exposure to urban environment and encased foods leads to emergence of novel food extraction and processing techniques with increased use of hand. For these behaviors, there is one fantastic thing which we have observed is that there are very strong between individual variations. Some monkeys are very skillful. Some other, like opening Coke bottles, for example. Not all monkeys were able to open it so neatly. So there are individual differences, but within individual, there is a very high consistency. So this reflects ecologically relevant and possibly innate behavioral adaptability. What kind of adaptability this is, I don't know. I cannot say whether it is phenotypic plasticity or even in the short run, the genetic adaptations have taken place. Though there's no way to tell. This often remains unknown, which I would still consider this is probably phenotypic plasticity. But cases have been where even the genetic adaptations take place in very short time, but I don't know, which remains to be seen. So a general lesson for this, primates in urban or anthropogenic habitats can provide immense insight into adaptation, behavioral flexibility, innovation, and cognition. These habitats They may not be their so-called natural habitats, but they are also natural habitats for them now. The animals which are living in these anthropogenic habitats, they are also their natural habitats. Now, because these animals are very vulnerable in such habitats, when we do these studies, we have to think of their welfare, and animal ethics should be our prime concern in all such habitats. And as we all know that giving of food to the monkey should be avoided, but if your experimental protocol requires it, that you need to offer food to the monkeys, like we had to do it sometimes, then only the commonly used food should be used, which the monkeys often eat. And then experiments also should be done that there is no full public view. It should be done away from people, and care also should be taken that the natural behavior is not altered. And if suppose it is, then there are several ways, post-experimentation ways, to find out how much would have been the effect of observer presence or conduction of these experiments, and habituation of groups in hostility with people should be minimized. So what I wanted to do was, first part of the talk was about conservation and management of primates, using primates as model, and the second, now this most of more recent work of ours, which has dealt with the effect of urban environment, where the monkeys are exposed to different kinds of food which are often encased, how it leads to the development and emergence of new skills, which is probably very important to study evolution and the patterns or emergence of new skills. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for your presentation.
Excellent. Lots of interesting points.
Okay.
You're good.
Yeah, and it's super interesting to see all of that research, and lion-tailed macaques. I mean, such a beautiful animal as well. So we don't get to hear enough about them, I think. Okay, so I would like to open this up to some questions from our audience, and unfortunately, about halfway through this, or in a few minutes, I'm going to transfer the hosting duties over to my colleague Susumu. But in the meantime, if anybody has any questions to get us started, you can raise
people are welcome to send me emails. I mean, Mike can give you my email address, and we are very prompt in replying. So,
yep.
So people can always write and ask for articles or ask any questions, whatever they may have.
Absolutely. We have a question from Rogan. Go ahead.
Hi. Thanks so much for the talk. It was really great. I really love the bridges over the roads that you guys made. I just love them. They're so awesome. Good idea. I was wondering about the forest connections that you guys were looking at and experimenting with between the forest fragments. Did you guys do any experiments with like the width that would be needed for these connections, or like, is it just kind of arbitrary depending on how much land you could use for them?
You see, this, if you look at these forest fragments, the connectivity, the animals are already moving there. In these forest fragments, they are forced to move. Elephants are moving there, for example, all the time. Leopards and tigers are moving. Gaurs are moving, which is called Indian bison. So what we are trying to identify is not only valley, for example, but with the places which are already being used by people, by the animals. So number one, they are like valleys, there are water sources, there are streams, that these are being used by animals already. So those are the places which we have identified that this is the places where their afforestation should be done so that the corridors can be established. Was that your question?
I just thought like you guys were adding more forest, like.
See, this is that is a very ideal situation, but you understand that these are private tea estates, these are tea gardens. So what has been done hundreds of years ago, I mean, that would be very nice that we can leave half of the country for the wild animals. But what we have to do is sort of see the cost and benefit of everything and whatever is feasible to do. I mean, ideally we should grow a lot of more forests, and probably I would be very happy if all these tea garden fellows go out and if the forest comes back. But that is not possible. So what is possible we have to do it is that to provide corridors so that the animals can move between or among the fragments. And asking the whole, it has happened in some places the coffee plantations and the cardamom plantations, which I mentioned one of my students. We are now working in an area where there are some gardens were abandoned by people. They were no more profitable, especially coffee and cardamom. So the forest is coming back there. So now we have selected different places like forest abandoned, this cropping abandoned 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. We are studying now regeneration of forest there. We are also studying how many animal species are coming back. I would very much like that kind of thing to happen, to have more and more forest. But what we have to do is we have to compromise things and see what possibly can be done. We would be very happy even if we can have corridors, at least between the fragments.
Yeah, I'm sure similar challenges as everywhere else. So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to sign off and pass my duties over to Susumu. But thank you again for the presentation. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Sure.
Yeah, I think we can take a few more questions for Dr. Singh. And those of you who are in the attendee space, you can use the Q&A panel to ask questions.
I've put Mewa's email address in the chat box for those of you who want to pick that up.
Yeah, that would be nice because, relaxed, we can give the answer to any questions you may have. You can send me email.
So I actually have a question about those bamboo bridges. Are there any other animals that use those bridges other than the lion-tailed macaques?
Oh, the squirrels are using the Indian giant squirrels. We have seen them moving around on these.
I see.
There are no other animals there. The arboreal animals are the langurs, but the langurs need not use them because the langurs are very much used to using the roadside trees, and they can jump and they can just jump on the roads. They are less arboreal than the lion-tailed macaques. But in that particular area where we have done this experiment, there are no Nilgiri langurs in that place. But other places they would definitely use. All animals would use. And I was talking to some students from Malaysia in conference in Nairobi, the last primatological conference in Nairobi. And they showed me some photographs of much better material which they are using for gibbons, which are far more sturdy. We have used some local resources. We just put some bamboo together. We just tied it up there. And later on, we have used certain ropes. But in Malaysia, they are using now materials which are, which are more sturdy and which are, where the gibbons are using them. So lots of different kind of materials are now available, commercially also available, which can be used, where you can build sort of these bridges.
I see. Yeah, I was wondering because from your talk, I got the impression that lion-tailed macaques could be considered as a kind of an umbrella species for protecting a bunch of other species in the area. So David Fassbender has a question, I think. David?
Maybe you can flash it.
Did he have his hand up or?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much. Very interesting. I learned a lot. I was just wondering, so it seems like there are many different overlapping monkey species, and some of them are competing. And in that situation, how do we choose which ones are a conservation priority? Are there criteria you think that are especially important for overlapping primates with so many of them endangered or in need of protection?
The conservation priorities, it's who are we to decide first of all? All animals need conservation. How do we make a value judgment that this animal is more important than the other animal? What we are doing now is, our thing is concerned that how much is what is the population status, which is dwindling, which is habitat specific, where these habitats also might disappear. On that basis, we are making these decisions. But ultimate thing is that all animals have to be protected. All animal species of wild animals should be protected. We have no right to say that this is more important than the other. But right, you are right. The question does come if you have, for example, priority over something else, in terms of limited resources available to you, both in terms of manpower, both in terms of, say, funding, then priorities come in terms of, for example, which species requires an urgent attention. So, and what I have shown now, why I selected bonnet macaques is that otherwise nobody would bother about bonnet macaques. I have selected, we are talking a lot about the lion-tailed macaques. Our country, we are so many people working on, conservation of lion-tailed macaques. Nobody has worked on conservation of bonnet macaques. It is only I who started talking about conservation. People thought in the beginning, this is nuts. Bonnet macaque, it is so common, it's there everywhere. But now I have shown in 30 or 40 years, it is not there everywhere. It is dying. Its populations are disappearing. It would, why should this also reach the same status like the lion-tailed macaque one day, when suddenly we wake up, now everything is gone. It has happened with house sparrows. It has happened with white-backed vulture. They suddenly disappeared. They were so common birds, for example, the house sparrow and the white-backed vulture. They have just gone now. The great Indian bustard in India, for example, there are only few animals left, probably not more than 20 animals total, birds. So why should we first reach that stage where alarm has to come, and only then we should do something? I mean, we should think of the species conservation right now.
Yeah. That's a good question, David. Thanks.
Okay, how about Sanjana?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you for the very interesting talk. I was wondering, so for the bonnet macaque conservation, you're approaching forest departments and you're approaching the government, but the villages and the outskirts of the cities that are the ones who are more or less poisoning the macaques, have you thought of outreach programs to talk to them in figuring out how they can also prevent killing these monkeys?
Absolutely. I mean, this is the, conservation education is required. The village are told we are interacting with them. But once it comes, I'm pretty hard about these things. Once it comes to their own livelihood, you'll think of a farmer, for example, who has half acre of land, and during monsoon or something, they grow some crop there, and their whole family is dependent on it for the whole year. Okay, if elephants or monkeys or something, some animal comes and damages this, the family has nothing to eat for the whole year. So we have to consider that also. Why they are doing it? I mean, it's not that otherwise in India, the animals are really worshipped in the country, despite that if the people are doing. Let me give you an example. This would answer your question. In state of Himachal Pradesh, up in Himalayas, there was a lot of problem with rhesus monkeys. And rhesus monkeys, they would raid orchards. There are a lot of fruit orchard gardens there. And the forest department or the government of Himachal Pradesh contacted me a couple of years ago. Can you help us? Can you do something? I said, look, I can do census. I can train you people to do the census, etc. So Kumara and me, we went there. We trained the forest department, conducted scientific census in the whole state, determined the population of rhesus macaques and bonnet with Hanuman langurs, then suggested where certain groups should be sterilized. And now they have 9 sterilization centers. And you'd be surprised that more than 150,000 monkeys have been sterilized. And then a scientific method also, who should be sterilized, where they should be left, what should be done, etc. See, all these methods are used. And public education at the same time. But ultimately, the people went to the Supreme Court of India, and the Supreme Court gave an order that the farmers can shoot the monkeys if the monkeys come and damage their gardens, only in that state. There is a legal order now by the Supreme Court of India, but 2 years, not a monkey was shot. Look, the people have reverence. Hanuman is the Hanuman god in India. The court gave the order. People are, in those places, there is a lot of conflict with people. The people don't tolerate monkeys damaging their gardens, but nobody is willing to pick up a gun and shoot monkey. So no monkey was killed. So now they have started calling some hard-hearted hunters, who are coming and shooting, and they're paying monkey, money to them. So there is public education, yes, but that education can work only up to some extent. But once it comes to their livelihood, and what we are seeing in most of the places is the dire situation. So yeah, public education is a part of our conservation plan all the time. And we are doing lots of camps, and there are a lot of other organizations. For example, we are the scientists at the university. We don't have that much time, but there are so many other organizations who take up this program in the schools and colleges and in the villages, talk to people and talk about conservation. But that is one thing. But then when it comes to the real livelihood of people, when there the things are very difficult. So we have to find out the places where the conflict would be minimum, and we have seen places which I showed, for example, there are places like this where the conflict with the people would be minimum, and we have seen the stability of populations, fantastic stability of populations. So such areas have to be viable habitats, have to be found, and they have to be provided legal protection there, and a notification that these are reserved for monkeys. And only then there is a scientific way of conserving these animals and managing these animals.
That's some amazing work that you did to follow over the long time and look at the difference, like you've shown so clearly, between habitats where they can survive very well and other places where they're gone. That's really nice. I've attached a photo for you in the chat box, Mewa. It's a picture of some of your students and I when we were at the lion-tailed macaque site some years back. I was just seeing your photos of all of them, and they haven't changed much at all.
You haven't changed at all. I mean, for years together, you look same to me.
I've got a question. I was really, really surprised. Very interesting. You showed the leaf wrapping of coconuts and then the pounding. I've been looking at stone handling behavior in Japanese macaques, rhesus macaques, Taiwanese macaques, and long-tailed macaques. But for in Bali and across India and in Taiwan, but the way that they're processing, that you showed the way they're processing the coconuts, the pounding behavior and the wrapping, we're seeing those same behaviors in response to stones and a very hard nut in Bali with the long-tailed macaques. But we don't see that so often in Japanese macaques. But I was struck by that flexibility to use it across different objects, but yet that behavior is common in long-tailed macaques in very different places.
I knew that this mention might come. So I went through Suchinda's papers on the Burmese, the long-tailed macaques there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sent her email 3 days ago. I've been talking to her through emails because there they use stone tools. So we were intrigued, like what is behind, what ecology? So actually this morning she sent an email that it's a mixture of the genetics and then the availability of the encased and embedded foods and cultural transmission. So I sent her one email back saying it is also the availability of stones. Now, in Nicobar Islands, there are hardly any rocks. So, if monkeys are using those stone tools, for example, there, it's even this one former student of mine, Madhur, who did all these Coke bottle experiments and this mousetrap experiments. He went to University of Georgia at Athens, and from there he went to Brazil to study those Capuchins who are using the stone tools.
Right.
And he was more interested in biomechanics of this, what is the weight of the stone and what kind of nut it is,
that's some
how
amazing
far the hand goes and so on. Very interesting work. So he was also saying that, we should have a hypothesis to verify sometime that even those monkeys probably may have lived close to people at some time. So these, with these kind of skills which the monkeys have developed, first is affordance, what is the availability, what is available, the kind of foods and kind of tools available. No, I was just talking to Saintan, for example, same Saintan was now telling me that the same nuts which are broken with stone tools in Burmese long-tailed macaques, the same foods are available and fruits are available in Nicobar Islands. Saintan was just telling me, but the monkeys just eat them.
Yeah.
So first of all, there are no stones there. These rocks are there, not there in that island. Probably it is the availability of these tools also. So it's a very complex thing to really understand.
Yeah.
I mean, what leads to, but you are right. The flexibility in so many different places, independently evolving. So that is very important. That the cultural transmission is in one region, in one place, okay. But then independently evolving these behaviors, that is very interesting.
Yeah. Where they come from evolutionarily, what triggers them, and often they get reinvented by the same species in different places. They can disappear and then they can come back again under different conditions. Yeah. Nice. That work you showed is going to be a classic, I'm sure. The difference between the urban, the semi-urban, and the rural.
It's very, very interesting.
Yeah,
and we are going to
nice
continue
work
with this and do more complex experiments. Actually, there are a number of things which Saintan is just writing his PhD thesis, and on the long-tailed macaques in Nicobar, he has done some other kind of experiments. For example, opening the latches and then rotating a disc. There is a glass box. You have coconut kept inside, and there is a hole, but then there is a disc which has to be rotated. So it has to be aligned so that the monkey can put the hand in. So they rotate and bring that hole there and put the hand in and take the coconut. So there are a number of other experiments are also which is done, which were, there was no time to talk about all those today.
Yeah, amazing stuff.
Yes, I thought the role of temples in the lives of macaques was really interesting. So, yeah. Okay, any final question for Dr. Singh from the audience? Okay, if not, please give Dr. Singh another round of applause.
People can keep in touch with us all the time, and
okay,
we will
thanks
respond.
again.
Thanks for listening to the PrimateCast. The podcast is hosted and produced by me, Dr. Andrew McIntosh, Senior Scientist for Wildlife Conservation at the Wilder Institute, Calgary Zoo, formerly Associate Professor of Biological Sciences at Kyoto University. Join me for new episodes as often as I can get them out on whatever podcast platform you prefer. Leave a rating or a review of the show to help other listeners find it. Connect with me through our website, theprimatecast.info, or social media on X, Facebook, or Instagram. Feel free to comment, ask questions, suggest future guests, or share whatever else might be on your mind. If you value the show, consider donating or becoming a member. You can do so by visiting theprimatecast.info and clicking on the big yellow Buy Me a Mic button, which takes you to our campaign page. Or you could click on that little heart icon next to the social media links in your podcast player, or on the text link in the show notes. Your support will help cover production costs and is essential to ensure that I can continue to produce quality informational and inspirational interviews with leading figures in the field long into the future.